2 o'clock. Let's start it up. All right, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Hope you're doing well. We're here again, third month in a row. This is March. Is it March, Carrie?
It's March.
It's March. All right, we're in the right month. So as always, once a month throughout this year, we're going to be bringing you some information and education on different parts of life. And today is a special one for all of us. And I think you're going to learn a lot of information about cycling, about laws that affect you and insurance. And I'm sure you're going to get a lot of good information. So we encourage you to be a part of this Facebook Live. So be sure that you check out Emojipedia. If you're not familiar with that, it's a complement to Wikipedia. So you can go on there and find out what emojis mean. So if you go on there and check that out real quick, you can come back in. You can't find the lobster, though, because there was a problem with the number of legs that the lobster had as a new emoji. So he was supposed to have 10. He only had 8, so they cut him off. So you can't use the lobster emoji today, but make sure you give us a thumbs up or give us a high five or raise your hand, ask us a question. Carrie will let us know, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a question to be answered today. So we want you to be involved in this Facebook Live, and make sure you ask any questions. If you have questions afterwards, we'll list emails and everything in the show notes that you can go on and get your questions answered. So today is all about cycling rights. Okay, what you should know about cycling laws and insurance coverage. So we'll be going through those two topics. And again, we also want you to ask any questions that may be mostly related to that, but if you have something a little bit that goes along with that or maybe a little off topic of that, that's okay. We're here to answer those questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce a new sponsor to FS Series this year. We met many times over at Caribou Coffee, shared some coffee, shared a lot of stories. We've become great friends. We have a good relationship with FS Series. And I'd like to welcome Thomas Henson from Henson Fuerst. And he's going to introduce himself here a little bit and talk about himself.
Yeah. So thanks for having me here, Jason. It's awesome to do this kind of stuff. I love doing this. And I'm really excited to be a part of your organization and everything that goes along with the FS Series. Just a little bit about me. I'm an attorney, obviously. Grew up in North Carolina. Went to school at Chapel Hill. Don't hold that against me, some of you guys. Went to school at Chapel Hill and been living in Raleigh ever since. The type of law that I do is broadly categorized as personal injury law, which basically means car wrecks, workers' compensation, workplace injuries, Social Security disability. Those are the type of things that our firm does. What I do in particular is more serious personal injury. I'm very involved with head injury cases, everything from very serious head injuries involving coma and things like that, down to things which are also serious, concussions, although not obviously as serious as coma cases. I also do a lot of work with cyclists. I'm a cyclist myself. I've been a cyclist for decades. I started off mountain biking and then transferred over to where I'm now, maybe half and half road biking and mountain biking. So I come at this from a lot of different angles. I come at it as a cyclist. I come at it as somebody who is very involved in the brain injury rehabilitation world, which sometimes is an offshoot of cycling cases in particular, because as we all know, we're vulnerable to head injuries. Yep. And when Jason and I first started talking about this, what we really wanted to accomplish was hopefully not this dry, uninteresting discussion of law as it applies to cyclists and insurance, which I can't imagine a more boring topic, but to really make this more practical and to let people understand the difference between what happens on the road in a particular accident, if an accident happens, and what the laws are that apply there, but also translate that and let everybody see how that works in the legal arena. Because a lot of times those two things don't match up the way that people think that they do. So that's a lot of what I think we'll be talking about.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. There's going to be a lot of good information coming out of here. I'm excited to learn a lot about myself. before we keep going a little bit further, you guys jump in there and tell us where you're located. Also tell us what FS events you're going to do this year. So we'd like to know, get your interaction with that, and let us know which ones, if you're doing triathlons or some swims or the bikes or runs. So just to encourage engagement and let us know through that, and then Carrie will holler over if we got any questions. So without moving into the first topic of discussion, we want to talk a little bit about the 4-foot law. And I didn't know a lot about this coming in, and you're going to learn a lot more about it from Thomas right here. So I'll turn it over to him to talk a little bit about that 4-foot law.
Yeah, so broadly speaking, there were some new laws that were introduced in October of 2016 that directly affected the interaction between cyclists and motorists. There were several aspects to that new law, different provisions, some dealing with the requirements for lights at night or reflective clothing to be visible within 300 feet from the rear of a bike at night. There was another that dealt with how turn signals are interpreted, and it basically legitimized the right-hand turn signals that cyclists have been using for years. But the most important aspect, at least in my opinion, of the October 2016 changes was the imposition of what we refer to as the 4-foot requirement. So traditionally, I think we all know that it at least in my experience, people have always been, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, have always been of the mindset that it's a courtesy for drivers to allow 3 or 4 feet when they're passing a cyclist or a group of cyclists. And some laws have implemented those types of minimum passing distance requirements. North Carolina in October of 2016 actually put that into law. And I want to read directly from the statute because I think it's important to know exactly what the statute means. So the statute allows vehicles to pass bicycles and mopeds in a no passing zone as long as certain parameters are met. The first parameter is that the bike is going in the same direction as the car. The second parameter is that the driver of the vehicle must provide either a minimum distance of 4 feet between the vehicle and the bike, or they must go entirely into the left-hand lane. So that's important for motorists to know because I think previously motorists have been unsure, do I have to skirt around the bike closely or can I get all the way over? This law specifically allows cars to go entirely into the left-hand lane and actually encourages it in addition to the 4-foot requirement. The third condition is that the bike must not be signaling a left-hand turn, as obviously you don't want cars passing a cyclist making a left turn. And then the fourth provision is that the driver of the passing car must be compliant with all the other driving requirements outlined that all drivers follow. So this is critical from my standpoint and for all of our standpoint because we all know what it feels like to be buzzed by a car. It's not comfortable, it's not safe. A lot of times it escalates into other more aggressive conversations between drivers and cyclists. And so this is something that the law is on the books, but I spend a lot of time in my, when I talk to cycling groups or when I talk to other different kinds of bike advocacy groups, I talk a lot about people publicizing this law, not just me as a lawyer. Everybody should be talking about this is the law in North Carolina, because just because it's on the books doesn't necessarily mean people know about it. So one of the things that I referenced this earlier, sometimes there's a huge disconnect between the law as it supposedly applies on the road and what happens in my world when I'm representing a cyclist who has been hit. So I want to talk about that in just a second. So, and I've actually got cases like this in my office right now. I represent, as I said, a lot of cyclists. I do a lot of sponsorships for cycling charity events. So I have a lot of conversations with all different levels of cycling and cyclists in terms of experience. But the common thread that I find is that it's almost, and it's human nature, I think, for a cyclist to say, well, that driver didn't give me 4 feet, so therefore I must be entitled to compensation in a personal injury lawsuit for any injury caused. And that's true in a vacuum. I mean, it is true that the law says a motorist must give a cyclist 4 feet. But if the motorist doesn't, or runs into the back of a cyclist or whatever, that potential client cyclist then comes to my office and says, well, this is obvious to me. The motorist didn't give me 4 feet. My response to them, which a lot of times surprises people, is here's the problem. As a lawyer, I have to have proof of what happened. And the burden of proof, as the law would call it, is on us as the plaintiff or the person bringing the lawsuit. We have the burden of proof to prove what happened. So what that means is if I as a lawyer have a client that says that motorist ran into the back of me and didn't give me 4 feet, but I've got a driver who says, oh, I was giving them 4 feet and they swerved into me, I've got a he said, she said situation, and if there's no eyewitnesses and if there's no other way to prove what happened, that's a very tough situation for me as the lawyer. And you can have the best lawyer in the world, but if you don't have evidence to prove to the jury what happened, then the law is important and it's there, but that doesn't necessarily translate into compensation on the legal side. So I guess to kind of wrap that box up, and we can talk more about it, but what I would always tell people is that do your best to avoid the he said, she said scenario. Either ride with other riders as much as you can who are then eyewitnesses to what happened, or ride with a GoPro, especially if you're on the road. And again, I've got clients right now whose cases are very, very challenging because I have no eyewitnesses, I have no GoPro, I've just got a client cyclist who says one thing and I've got a driver who says another. And those are tough cases. We're still fighting it, and we still do everything we can, but that is a more challenging case than if you have eyewitnesses or GoPro film footage.
Right.
Can cars cross the double yellow line when passing cyclists?
Yes, and under this new law, that makes that clear, and the statute is specific that a vehicle may pass cyclists in a no passing zone as long as they follow the 4-foot rule, as long as the bike is going in the same direction, and as long as the driver is compliant with all other requirements. Now that's the North Carolina law. I guess theoretically it's possible we have people from other states, so each state is different, obviously.
Right.
Are cyclists in downtown Raleigh allowed to ride outside of the bicycle lanes?
You are allowed to, but just because you should do something doesn't mean, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something necessarily. Yeah. Under the law in North Carolina, bicycles are vehicles. So a cyclist has a right to be on the road wherever a car has the right to be on the road with certain circumstances. You can't ride on interstates and stuff like that. But basically, generally speaking, a cyclist can ride where a vehicle rides. That's a double-edged sword, though, because that means a cyclist has the rights of a driver, but it also means the cyclist has the obligations of a driver.
Right.
So you and I, Jason, were talking before we went on camera about cyclists rolling stop signs and things like that, and vehicles aren't allowed to roll stop signs, so cyclists aren't either. So, we have to remember that with the rights of vehicles, we also have the duties and the obligations of vehicles.
Yeah, that kind of brought us into our second, well, not the second topic, but an add-on to that we were talking about was that as cyclists, we need to do a better job of obeying the laws of the road, just like we were driving a car. I'm going to say I've done it myself, but rolling stop signs, people going up between cars, people going down sidewalks. If we want to be treated with I feel like more respect or more like a vehicle, we need to make sure that we're riding in a place that requires you to stop at a stop sign. Stop, right? If you have a stoplight, stop. If there's 20 cars in front of you, 2 lanes, don't roll through the middle of the cars and go up to the stop sign. And I see this all the time in big group rides, and I think patience is something that as cyclists that we need to understand that a 5,000 pound car is way more dangerous than us riding our little bikes around, and people don't really care at some points. So we need to make sure that we do our job.
And I think that's a good point. And going back to the whole, can a cyclist ride outside of the bicycle lane? The bicycle lane is obviously the safest place to be, and so my advice to people, the law is important, and obviously that becomes more important as I represent cyclists who have been injured. My preference is that the cyclist not be injured to begin with, and we don't ever have to have that conversation. I would just soon not represent another cyclist for the rest of my career.
Right.
I'm here and I have a set of knowledge and I am a cyclist, so when that happens, I want to help as much as possible. But obviously the goal is to be safe. So should you stay in the travel lane, in the bicycle lane? Absolutely, because that's the safest place to be. If there's an obstacle in the bicycle lane that makes it not the safest place to be, then take the next safest route. But that's the type of thing, those are the minute by minute decisions that as cyclists we all make. That we have to do what's safest for us and the other cyclists around us.
Right. So that actually brings up two questions that I kind of have. So one being, if you're riding in the bicycle lane in a car, somebody opens their car door, right? Because in downtown Raleigh, there is a lot of cycling lanes that are next to the car door. So if they open their door, and you fall off and get hit, I mean, is that another? Let's say nobody saw it, right? Is that another he said, she said?
Everything in my world is case specific. so that's the first answer.
Right.
The general answer is that if a car is parked beside the bike lane, then that vehicle, whether they're parked beside a bike lane or not, the driver is always required to keep a proper lookout around their vehicle. So as the lawyer representing a cyclist who has that open door problem, and I've had cases like that, then obviously my argument is, look, if you're parked beside a bike lane, you should make absolutely sure that there's no cyclist coming before you open your door. And generally that argument prevails. And we can be pretty successful with that. The challenge sometimes comes, and I'm going to sound a little bit like a legal nerd here, but it's an important principle in North Carolina law that very few people know about unless you're in the legal arena. So North Carolina has what's called the law of contributory negligence, which basically means, and the easiest way to explain this is to explain what most states do. Most states have what is called comparative negligence. So if you have a driver who does something wrong and a cyclist, if a jury decides that the driver is 60% at fault and the cyclist is 40% at fault, let's say, then the cyclist can still recover for injuries from an accident, but the recovery gets reduced by 40%. So if the total damages are $10,000 that the jury decides, then the cyclist can recover $6,000 because of that 40% offset.
Okay.
In North Carolina, what makes it extremely unjust, in my opinion, is contributory negligence as opposed to comparative negligence. In North Carolina, if the cyclist or any driver for that matter is at fault in any way, 1%, you can have a jury decide that the defendant is 99% at fault. If the cyclist is 1% at fault, there is a total bar to your recovery, which means you get zero. I don't care if you've got $100,000 in medical bills and can't work for the rest of your life. If a jury thinks that the cyclist is at fault in any way for causing or contributing to the accident, then it is a complete bar to that cyclist's recovery.
Wow.
So in your question, somebody opens a door. Guess what the argument is going to be from the lawyer who represents the driver who opened the door? That lawyer is going to say, well, the cyclist should have known and kept a proper lookout and been aware that somebody may open a door. So the cyclist, Mr. Henson, your client, is partially at fault for not stopping in time before the door opened. So again, that raises the question of, if I've got no eyewitnesses, I've still got a he said, she said, because the driver may say, hey, I checked, I turned around, and I didn't see anybody coming, and that guy was going 25 miles an hour on his bike, and he was going too fast in a bike lane.
Right.
So it makes it challenging. So that's why in my world there's never an absolute scenario.
Right.
And it begs this question of always ride with other people or ride with a GoPro, especially on the road.
Is there a speed limit in the bike lane? Or is it the speed limit of the road? I don't know if that's a...
No, yeah, I mean, if you're able to ride the speed limit of the roads, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You know, most people in a bike lane is not going to be in an upper speed limit scenario.
Right.
Most of the bike lanes are going to be in your 25 mile an hour or lower. So always follow the speed limit. And in the bike lane, then very rarely are you going to be riding in a scenario where you're going to be able to ride faster than what the speed limit is anyway.
Right.
And if you're riding 35 miles an hour on a road that's small enough to have a bike lane, you probably shouldn't be. Because that lends itself to the argument of, well, if you open a door in front of somebody going 30 miles an hour, then it's partially that guy's fault because he was riding too fast.
Yeah, I was just thinking about like Hillsborough Street when you're coming down to NC State campus. There's a section right at like the Ratskill or the Mitch's Tavern right there where you go down, and like, I'm pretty sure if you were nailing it, you could go 30 miles an hour. And the cars are like parked here, and the bike lane is not in the right spot. It's
Right.
just right where the doors are open.
Well, remember the overarching rule is that a bicycle is a vehicle.
Yeah.
So if a vehicle can't speed, a bike can't speed, even if you're going downhill.
We have some questions about roundabouts, as in downtown Raleigh. Do bicycles yield to cars just like they are a car?
Absolutely, absolutely. 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 100, when somebody asks, "Can a bike do this?" the answer is, if a vehicle can or should do it, then the answer is a cyclist can or should do it. Now there's some nuances to that. Again, an example is this 4-foot law. I mean, if you never really thought about this, but if a car passes another car, there's no law that gives a 10-foot passing requirement, car versus car. So there are some nuances that apply just for cyclists. But 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be a cyclist has to do whatever the driver of a car would do.
And can we touch base on our rights if a homeowner that doesn't leash their dog and the dog runs out in the road and causes injury to the rider?
Well, the general answer to that is let's take it out of the cycling context for a second. Generally speaking, homeowners are responsible for maintaining their, in a lot of the cases you see as lawyers deal with livestock, like a horse gets out and runs into a highway and there's a big collision and there's a bad injury. Generally, homeowners are required, or property owners are required, to keep their animals under control. That does not necessarily mean in any given circumstance that they have to keep them leashed up on the front porch. But for instance, different counties have leash laws, Wake County being one of them. So there's obviously a reason for that leash law. So if you have a homeowner that has a dog that's unleashed in violation of that leash law, then there are court decisions that say that it's, and this is legal lingo now, but that it's reasonably foreseeable that if your pet or animal is not leashed or controlled, that it could get out into a public roadway and cause damage or cause injuries. And again, since cyclists and bikes are cars, it's really no different than if a horse gets out and shouldn't have gotten out and there's a bad pileup with cars because the horse runs across the highway. It's no different than if a dog comes out and there's a cyclist that gets hurt as well.
I mean, I imagine you've probably seen where a dog runs out in the road and cars ran into each other because of the dog.
Yeah, absolutely,
And so
absolutely. And those, like I said a second ago, I mean, it's very case specific. And there's also this dynamic, which we don't have time to get into, of in North Carolina you have to have a unanimous jury verdict, which means there's 12 jurors in the jury, and all of them have to agree that in that scenario the homeowner messed up by not having their dog on a leash, and they all have to agree that the cyclist was not contributorily negligent, to use that term I used earlier, and they all have to agree on what the amount of the damages were in terms of injuries or medical bills or whatever. So you may have it. Sometimes juries, it doesn't matter what the law is. They're sitting there thinking, well, I don't care if there's a leash law or not. You should be able to let your dog run free in Wake County, especially if you're out in the middle of nowhere. So again, just because the law says something doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed a certain result if you go to court. But generally speaking, yes, homeowners are required to keep to act in conformity with whatever leash laws apply to them.
Okay. If you're cycling not on the road, but on private property, i.e. 286, and you're injured, are you able to file insurance for that, even though you're not really supposed to be riding there? It's airport.
286 is...
Well, yeah. And I've actually ridden at 286, so I can answer that. Right. That's a tricky question. More broadly phrased, that question is, if you're on a mountain bike or if you're hiking or if you're whatever, if you're on somebody else's property, can you sue that person if there's some act of negligence while you're on that property and still recover for your injuries? the first question I would ask on the 286 example is, first of all, you have to prove negligence. You have to prove that somebody did something wrong. So in the airport scenario, they own that land. There's really no argument that they've done anything wrong if you just fall off your mountain bike and get hurt, because they haven't opened it up as a mountain bike park. There's no claim that they negligently maintained any type of mountain bike park. So that's really the first obstacle. You don't even get to insurance, because unless you prove negligence on the part of the landowner, in this example the airport authority, then there's really no case to begin with. So in a liability insurance context, in terms of suing the airport, probably not. Everything is case specific. Lawyers are famous for being able to create different kinds of arguments from different fact patterns. But as a general rule, unless there's negligence, you can't pursue anything. You would obviously have your health insurance for your medical bills, but that's separate and apart from suing the airport authority.
And maybe they meant by that question, I don't know, that they meant like maybe if two cyclists ran into each other. I don't know that they.
And it may or may not, but if two. I have not been confronted with that situation yet. That's going to be a very uncomfortable scenario if I ever am. The scenario being a cyclist comes to request my services because they claim another cyclist was negligent. And I can see that happening.
Right.
If somebody slams on brakes too quick, or if somebody swerves unnecessarily and get somebody front tire or whatever, theoretically there could be a claim there. If you do something, again, just like cars, if you sideswipe me in a car, then you're probably going to be liable. If you sideswipe me on a bike, there's at least theoretically a claim there.
Yeah.
Are there any laws that cyclists need to know about outside of the laws that most of us already know, such as stopping at stop signs, not riding in between cars?
That's an interesting question.
They have new lights. Is that?
Yeah,
is that a law, or?
there's. Part of the new law deals with lighting, and the statute specifically says, I printed it out, you have to, if you ride at night, you have to have a front light that illuminates 300 feet, and you have to have a rear lamp that illuminates 300 feet back, or you have to be wearing reflective clothing that reflects within 300 feet back. Hopefully, all of us as cyclists, if you're riding at night, wouldn't even need that law, because you'd be doing that anyway. To me, that's just common sense.
Right.
But yes, the law does require that. That's probably a big one. One thing that not many people know is that part of the new law also imposes a series of fines for motorists who cause cyclists to either veer in their lane or run off the road. And especially if a police officer witnesses it, or if there's some kind of confirmation of this, if a driver runs a bicyclist out of their lane or off the road, then a $200 fine can be imposed. Mm-hmm. If any property damage or personal injury occurs from that incident, then a $500 fine can be imposed. If there's what the statute calls serious personal injury is incurred, then there's a $750 fine that can be imposed. Now, in my world and in everybody's world, that's not much in terms of paying for medical bills and things like that. But I think what's critical about that new law is that it puts us in the same protected class as motorcyclists, because they've had those same types of fines for a good while now, and now cyclists are considered part of that protected class. So it's a nice step forward for us.
And you'd still have to have proof of that, such as a GoPro or witnesses.
You would. Well, it depends. That's a little bit. The short answer is yes. In terms of somebody, because that's more of a fine that's imposed by a court, as opposed to us suing for an injury and getting a jury to award damages for personal injury. So if you have a fine that's imposed by a court, the same rules apply. The court and the judge still want to see evidence that offense, whether it's this or some other offense, was committed. So yes, if you've got eyewitnesses, if you've got GoPros, then those are the types of things that would be helpful. And maybe a segue to our second topic is, what are the things that cyclists should know about? as you and I have talked numerous times, I'm on a personal mission to talk to people and educate cyclists in particular about insurance. And you and I have talked about that numerous times. I don't know if you want to just kind of take that ball and run with it,
Well, yeah,
or whether you want to lead
let
into
me
it
do
a little
one
bit
more.
different.
I had one more question, and I think this is really important too that we see. And I've been involved in some of these, but when you get into confrontation with a car or with a person or anything on the, you may have got buzzed, and then you come up onto them like on a stop sign. What are the best, I mean, I know there's 100 different ways, but what are the best courses of action? Is to get their license plate number, or what, to not like, it's not go bang on the car, right? Because then if you damage the car, you're going to be in trouble. So what would you recommend if something happens, to some steps you should take?
Yeah, I mean, part of my advice is really no different as a lawyer than if I wasn't a lawyer. It's all this idea of keeping yourself safe. And so there's this idea of, I don't care how mad you are, do not be aggressive, because that can't lead to anything good. And so at the end of the day, never be aggressive, either by raising your voice vocally or by pounding on the car or anything like that. Now, you know, I'm human. I've raised my voice before when somebody's buzzed me, so I'm not necessarily saying that.
Right. Yeah.
But, you know, in that sense, do everything you can to stay safe, which generally means don't escalate the situation. I think your idea is a good one. Get the license plate, get the make and model of the car, if you can get a description of the person driving the car. All of those are helpful. GoPro is the best evidence you got. I mean, we've all started to see the YouTube videos now,
right,
of the crazy woman in the car buzzing the cyclists. I saw that one a few months ago,
right,
and they turned that video right to the police, and the woman got arrested.
Yeah.
So that's a lot more effective than if you just go to the police station and say, "Well, some woman ran me off the road."
Yeah.
It's not the same.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a gentleman that says, I've had drivers cut me off the road and had it on camera, then took it to the police, but they said they can't act on video if there wasn't damage or injury. Is that true?
In my experience, that is the position they take. So, when you say, is that true or not, every department and every law enforcement agency generally has their own policies and procedures. I think that probably is what you will normally hear, because if the police were under some kind of legal duty to act every time some driver did something wrong but didn't cause any negative consequences from it, then they'd be doing nothing but, tracking down drivers who had done something wrong but hadn't hurt anybody. So that is probably a typical response from law enforcement.
Okay. Any more questions? All right, cool. Well, that'll take us into part 2. That was lots of great questions. Continue to shoot over those questions, making the dialogue we're good over here. Second off, let's talk about a little bit about insurance and
All right.
what a cyclist should know about having insurance.
All right, so part of this conversation is going to be morose, because it's like somebody trying to sell you life insurance. And to get out on the front, I'm a lawyer, I don't sell insurance. So this has nothing to do with anybody selling insurance. But as a lawyer in personal injury, I deal all the time with insurance and whether insurance amounts and coverages are enough to cover a client's injuries. So this can be a very dry topic, but bear with me for a couple minutes. And if you take nothing else away from this video, take the following. As part of the notes for this, you will have my email. I'm happy to give my phone number, whatever. I have something, and I encourage everybody to get something called uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage. That is a type of coverage that you buy from your own insurance company that is designed to give you extra money if you get hurt because of someone else's negligence, but it covers the situation where they don't have enough insurance. So if you do nothing else after watching this video, go to your insurance agent and say, I want to purchase as much uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage as you will let me purchase and that I can afford. So let me explain what that is. Everybody driving around in North Carolina is required by law to have $30,000 worth of insurance, liability insurance on their car. That means, Jason, if you're in your car and you're riding along and somebody runs a stop sign and hits you, if they put you into a coma and you have $100,000 worth of medical bills or more, and you can never work again for the rest of your life, you or your family's representative comes to me and says, we've obviously got this huge problem. We got all these medical bills, all these losses. Can you help us? My first question is going to be, in my legal strategy, I'm going to go start digging for as much insurance as I can find. So the first place I'm going to look is to the insurance for the driver of that vehicle. If they have what is legally required in North Carolina, that's going to be $30,000, okay? A lot of people driving around don't even have $30,000. They have none. So they have no insurance. Now that's illegal,
Right.
but they're still doing it. So if you come to me or your family comes to me and says, what do we do in this situation? If I figure out that the defendant only has $30,000 worth of insurance and they're not the equivalent of LeBron James or Bill Gates or somebody that has a ton of assets, then the very horrible scenario is that you will be able to recover $30,000 for your injuries. I don't care how much your medical bills are. I don't care how much lost wages you have. I don't care what your situation is. I don't care how good your lawyer is. If that car only has $30,000 worth of insurance, that's all you're going to get. Uninsured and underinsured coverage is a protection that we can purchase, that anybody can purchase, to protect yourself in that scenario. So let's have the same scenario, same horrible injuries, but you have had the foresight to go out and buy $1 million worth of what's called underinsured coverage. A lawyer like me in that scenario will go fight for and hopefully get the $30,000 from the vehicle that hit you, and then I'm going to turn around to your insurance company and I'm going to say, I want the rest of these losses covered by your policy of up to $1 million. So if you have $200,000 in medical bills and bad personal injuries, I would say I'll get $30,000 from this company, and I'm going to turn around to your company and I'm going to say I want $200,000 from you for his medical bills, and also money for pain and suffering and lost wages and that type of thing. $1 million worth of uninsured/underinsured coverage is not that expensive. We're talking hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
I have had countless cases representing drivers and just quote normal clients, non-cyclists, where that's a problem, where there's no underinsured coverage and there's minimum coverage on the other side. But it is especially important, and I've had countless cases of cyclists who have been hit, and we all know that generally that does not end well in terms of injuries
Right.
and the level of medical treatment that's required. I've had numerous cases where I have to look at my cyclist client, who I identify with on a visceral level because I'm a cyclist myself, and I have to tell them, and not to be overly dramatic, but sometimes close to tears in my eyes, saying, I cannot get you any more than $30,000. I know you're catastrophically injured, but there is just nothing else for me to do.
Yeah.
So the one thing you can do, and I put this in a brochure that we'll have links to on
Right,
your guys'
yeah, we got
website
that
and
on
all
there.
that, all of this is explained in this. It's not really a brochure as much as it is just an informational little tip card kind of thing that explains all that. So I know all that's kind of dry and insurance-y and all that, but please, 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 everybody who's watching, go to your agent, say I want to buy as much uninsured and underinsured coverage as possible, and tell every friend and family member you have, whether they're a cyclist or not, the same thing. But it's most important for cyclists or people who run. I mean, obviously anybody who's on the road and interacts with cars, runners, cyclists, whatever.
I guess swimming you could get hit by a boat, but it's probably happened.
And interestingly enough, what people need to know is that type of coverage applies to all of your family members, no matter where they are. So we've been talking about if you get hurt, then we can take advantage of your underinsured coverage. But if you have a daughter who's in a car, who's in your neighbor's car, and they get hit by an uninsured or an underinsured motorist, then your daughter also has the ability to go after that $1 million in coverage if she has serious injuries.
Gotcha.
So it applies to a lot more than just the person who purchases the insurance.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't realize that in North Carolina, or if they don't have the proper insurance, and I imagine vast majority of the people do not have
the vast majority of people
the right
do not.
coverage on the car as
They
well
don't.
as the boat, or anything else that they may use. And I guess that would also apply if the cyclist was at fault, correct? Or if so let's say,
In what sense?
So let's say if the cyclist was at fault and caused the car to run into a ditch, and the person got hurt. So would their underinsured for them offset any of the cost?
That's
for
an
the person
interesting question.
Getting hurt?
So let me make sure I understand your hypothetical. A cyclist does something negligent, as it would be called in my world, and causes a driver to run off the road, and the driver of the car is hurt.
Yes.
I'd have to have the North Carolina has what's called a standard automobile insurance policy.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to look at that to figure out exactly what the language is. I mean, we've talked about how a
Yeah.
bicycle is a vehicle for purposes of driving requirements under the statute, but I would bet that in order to recover under an automobile liability insurance policy, you'd have to be hit by an actual vehicle. But it would depend on how vehicle is defined in the automobile insurance policy.
Right.
So that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I just thought, I was thinking
that.
about we always try to defend, ourselves for cars buzzing us, but there's probably been countless times where a bicycle has actually caused other cars from being negligent to get into, an accident as well.
Right.
So that would be something interesting for us to look at, and maybe we'll look at that.
I can look at that easily enough.
Get some information over.
So in order to use that insurance, if it's found that the cyclist is even 1% at fault for the rest, can you still use that insurance?
Great question. The answer to that is no. What's interesting is that in that scenario, your insurance company steps into the shoes of the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if I represent a cyclist, we file the lawsuit, there's the defendant driver will have a lawyer, and interestingly, your own company that you have a relationship with will also have a lawyer defending your company against your claim, even though it's your company. And all of the same defenses that apply and are available to the defendant driver are also available to your own underinsured or uninsured company.
Two FS members, Uncle Bobby and D. Wayne, want to know, are there any roads that are off limits to cyclists, and how would you know this? Are there signs?
Well, you guys are from South Africa, so riding on Interstate 40, which you did, is illegal.
Right.
They were coming home from Smithfield from a race we do down there, and they got lost, so they took the wrong road. They ended up, and they're on I-40 down in Garner.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I know interstates, you can't do it, roads like Highway 64. I don't know off the top of my head whether that is specifically illegal for a bike to be on that road. My guess is that it would be.
There's a lot of people that ride on 64.
There are a lot of people that ride on 64, so I don't know. That also begs the question, even if it's not restricted, is that really where you want to be?
Right.
When you got tractor trailers going 80 miles an hour, that may not be the best choice or the safest choice, kind of almost regardless of what the law is.
Yeah.
But sometimes, that said, if you have a right to be on the road, then you have a right to be on the road.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, you can't be on Interstate 40, Interstate 95. So Bobby and
Probably
Dwayne.
540 would be off.
And 540 would be
Anything with a blue sign, with a blue interstate sign,
Yeah.
that is for sure.
264, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any more questions? No. Anything else? You
I guess the only other thing I would say, especially to the triathletes and endurance athletes of the world, which I do not consider myself an endurance athlete. I recreationally ride a lot, and I have ridden long distances, but I'm by no means a triathlete in the way that, for instance, you are. I occasionally, especially when I represent higher level triathletes and cyclists and endurance athletes, the thing that makes you so good at being an endurance athlete can sometimes work against you in the legal arena. And what I mean by that is, endurance athletes have an incredible aptitude or ability to withstand pain. And I've had various higher level athletes who they get hurt. It would be a relatively serious injury to a non-triathlete or a non-endurance athlete, but because they're so used to enduring pain, or they want to tough it out, or whatever, they don't go seek medical treatment. And then finally it gets so bad they have to see a doctor, but it's 2 months later. You can imagine the argument I'm going to get. Well, if you were that hurt, Mr. Cyclist, why didn't you go to the doctor?
Right.
And a jury, that sounds reasonable to a jury. So I guess my parting bit of advice would be, don't go to a doctor unless you have to. I'm not saying don't do that. But I mean, if you have been injured, go get your injuries documented. And if you need treatment, go get treatment. Don't tough it out, because part of what I do is use the medical documentation from the physicians and the healthcare providers to help prove what your injuries are. And if there are no medical records, despite the fact that you've been injured, then I got no evidence.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense for sure. So, any more questions? Well, this was great. A lot of good information. Hopefully people will go back and watch it. And again, if you have any questions, we'll put your email on there
Sure.
as well. You can call the office. You can send an email to Jason at FS Series as well. Please ask for any more questions. This PDF is available.
That's available on our website, which is lawmed.com.
Okay.
And my email address is Thomas Henson, just all spelled out, at lawmed.com as well.
Okay. Yeah, so go on there and you can check out this PDF brochure, download it, read over it. And again, we thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
A lot of great information. April will bring us down to Runology in downtown Raleigh. We'll be talking about shoes, running, and everybody's favorite beer. So please join us. It's the first week of April, another Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Is it the 6th? Does that sound right? April 6th, something like that. Coach Michael will let us know what's the right day. Yeah, Sunday, maybe it's Monday. But he'll let us know what day it is, and we'll be in touch. But thank you guys for joining in, and thank you
Absolutely.
for having us.
Thanks,
And-
guys.
Yeah, we have a lot of the people coming in saying thank you, so.
Absolutely.
I think we
I
had a lot of
appreciate it.
people
I
get a lot
appreciate
out
it.
of
Stay
it.
safe.
Awesome. Well, sounds good. If you guys got any questions, hit us up. Have a great day. We'll see you next month.